Hi, everybody. This is Jocelyn at JocelynLive, and I have Dr. Mari again with me today. How are you, Mari?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great. Okay, today we're going to do something a little bit different. I actually have a very close friend of mine that listened to our last podcast on fear and what are you afraid of losing? And she gave us some really good feedback as far as a direction to take in relation to the things that she's afraid of. And so I'm going to read to the audience and to you, Dr. Mari, what my girlfriend wrote. She said, I know what my fears are mostly. It's the dealing with them that I need help with, like ignoring or managing that inner voice of fear and negativity. So I'm really looking forward to your next podcast. She said, I have a constant fear that comes with my daily life every day. And how do you move beyond that? I recognize things that I'm afraid of losing. So, what is next after that? Some of us have spent our whole life in fear, and I want out. And I said, that's the truth. You're right. Many people want out. And so she defined some of her fears for me. And she said, I realize it's been a constant for me. Number one, my biggest fear was my dad was going to take me again. And I always had to hide. When she was about 5 years old, she was kidnapped by her dad. Her parents were getting divorced, and he cut her hair off and made her pass as a boy. And she was living with him like that in hiding for quite some time. The second fear that she had was leaving her husband or ex-husband, because that put her in a position to be a single mom with 3 kids. He wasn't very reliable. The third fear that she had was losing her child, her youngest child, because when he was 9 years old, he was diagnosed with AML leukemia. He's now 26, and he's doing really well. Her fourth fear is fear of poverty. Her fifth fear is that she's not good enough as a parent, as a woman, and as a manager. And she's, pretty big manager at a hospital. And her last fear, but I'm sure not the only one, is the fear of being alone, coupled with fear of making another bad relationship decision and the fear that no one will want her. And she said, it's brutal. And she literally had just written it all out when she had text messaged me. And my response to her was, it sounds like there is a fear of being exposed. And I think that when we expose our fears, I think that it makes us want to run and hide. And so I want to hand this one over to you, based on some of the questions that you heard her ask. Let's try and keep this short, because I know you've probably got 40,000 things in your head that you can respond to. So I'm going to let you take over.
Yeah, her response to you was pretty loaded. There's lots of stuff there for me anyway. And so I was just kind of jotting some notes down so I could stay on track. And I came up with 6 different things we could talk about, and each one of them would take, an hour if we needed to. The first one was her comment about ignoring or managing the voice of fear.
Hmm.
That was an interesting concept and definitely something we can address. Recognizing fears, but what is next? Right? That's a
Hmm.
question lots of people have. It's like, okay, I know what I'm facing. Now, how do I face it? Right?
Hmm.
Um, and then third was actually walking through the process of fear. So dealing with the actual fear, right? So recognizing and knowing what's next is actually kind of this anxiety thing. And dealing with it is more of a conscious, cognitive implementation of different ways of handling life, right? So it's a different topic, but it's all in the same genre. And
Hmm.
then this thing that came up for me, she didn't say it, but this is what just came up for me was turning her fears inside out and doing what I call counterintuitive reprogramming. So
Hmm.
counterintuitive reprogramming is what my intuition tells me sometimes is what I'm very comfortable and familiar with.
Hmm.
And really what I need to do is almost the exact opposite and it becomes counterintuitive because it's just not what I'm used to. Um, so that is another thing that came up for me with her. The fifth thing, I know I have a lot, but the fifth thing is how do I deal with the anxiety trap when she says I'm in a constant state of fear? I'm constantly thinking about this, losing that, whatever that is. And
Let's
so
start there.
that
That's
became
where we should start.
right.
Hmm.
And there's one last one that I'm just going to put on your radar. And that is just this vulnerability. She said she didn't want to be found out. right? She didn't want to be found out. And that just means I don't want to be vulnerable to anyone. Well, the problem with not being,
No. We're ashamed of
yeah,
our fear.
right.
Yeah.
So that vulnerability actually keeps the anxiety trap we just talked about alive and well, right? It feeds
Mhm.
it. It becomes the nourishment for the anxiety trap.
Mhm.
So those are like, like I said, in her response, there's 6 things, and if I really listened probably a little harder, I probably could find 5 more things that I would want to talk about. And the
Mhm.
reason why I said I displayed or reported out like that is because I want people to really understand that this is big.
Mhm.
So they give us one word or one sentence or one paragraph, and they think, oh, it's just a paragraph of information. But for you and I, it's like, no, that's huge. It's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff. So to be able to come and snap your fingers and it's all gone would be silly to think, right? When
Mhm.
we're hearing all, I heard all of that out of what you just read to me,
Mhm.
right? But this person might get frustrated because she can't get quote unquote fixed immediately.
Right. So to me, what I heard was that fear is her loudest and strongest emotion, that he's even able to override her love. And I don't mean her love for her children or grandchildren, but I mean it overrides the good in her life, and it is stopping her from doing the things that she wants to do in her life.
Or overrides the love for herself, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And I'm not a Bible scholar, and nor do I subscribe to be the strongest Christian in the world. But one time that I was sitting in a lecture, and the guy says, "Hey, there's 1,600 some odd commandments in the Old Testament. Thou shall nots, and if you do, I'll kill you," type thing, right? That's what God says. And he said, and then God realized that people are really, really stupid. So in the New Testament, there's only 2, right? He gives us 2 commandments. One is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And again, I'm using this as a frame of reference, not because I believe this is what everybody should believe. And the second one is love your neighbor as you love yourself. So one is your relationship with a higher being, higher power, love God. And the second one is a relationship with your neighbors in relation to your relationship with yourself. So it says,
Right.
love your neighbors as you love yourself. I translate that to be, you will love your neighbors the way you love you. So if you're not loving you really well, you're probably not loving them really well because you can only give the love that you know, right? It's not because you're bad. It's because you only can give them the love you know. So if you're loving them out of anxiety, anxious place, it's not the purest love, right? So that's why moms and dads will buy their kids, instead of punishing
Yeah.
or disciplining their kids, because they're afraid of losing their kid. Well, if they turn it on itself, it's really how they love themselves. They don't know how to just say, it's okay to do something wrong. You don't have to atone for that. You have to correct it, but you don't have to atone for it. You have to bring a gift of
Right.
blessings for that. So I'm saying that all to say is that when you say things like, yeah, she's loving out of fear, or she's can't really love because she's afraid. That's also all really true because it starts with self first. How you do you is how you're going to do others. And
Well,
so,
fear creates doubt. I mean, when
absolutely,
you are fearful, you're doubtful. You're out
absolutely,
of belief, you're out of faith, and faith and knowing go hand in hand, right?
absolutely,
And to take the God thing a little bit farther, and I think that our consciousness is a representation of what God is, right? Because
right,
everything is consciousness. And I think that for me, in the work that I do, when we remove our consciousness from the outer world and instead we begin to pull it back within, and this takes time, whether you pray or you meditate or you walk for an hour every day or whatever it is that you do, I think the first step is for people to pull in themselves. And she says, I know I have these fears. And so she's saying, how do I manage them? And I don't think you can ignore fear. I think you have to recognize your fear and see what it's doing and see that fear isn't real. Fear is only a thought that then becomes a feeling. And then that emotion takes you on a wild roller coaster ride.
right,
And we have to get ourselves off the roller coaster and recognize that what's actually happening is we're responding to something that we believe to be true that has no validity to it. They're lies, right? And it's like when we're fearful of leaving a spouse, as she said, she's looking at what could come down, how many bricks are going to fall before she actually looks at her freedom. She can't even get to the freedom and the better life that she would have by leaving her spouse. You see, and it was a very tumultuous relationship.
Right.
And so she stays or stayed, and she finally did leave because she found the strength to do it by seeing life has to be better. And sometimes we have to get to that point where we literally turn around and tell our fear to F off
Mhm.
because this is going to kill me. So I have to do this. And she's completely fine. Many people have fear of money. It's the same thing, right? When they're completely taken care of.
Right.
Okay. So these fears you can see, right, stop us from pursuing or letting go of things that aren't good for us. And fear is actually not good for us. And I'm not talking about the fear in our gut, when, I mean, we actually have to be concerned about something that is life threatening. That's not what I mean. These are not life threatening things.
Right.
And so the next step, I talk about it through prayer and meditation. You have even said you have to identify what it is that you need to let go of.
Right.
Okay. So knowing what you know, and I know that it's big. What you say, you probably have 40 things that you could address.
Right.
How can we guide her in the letting go process of recognize, like, whoa, you have to recognize what's happening to yourself in every moment. We don't even realize, oh my god, I'm so uptight. Your breathing's off, your blood pressure's up, and you have no idea that you're even doing it.
Right.
And you're in a constant state of angst, and that's why a lot of people have anxiety, because of their thoughts,
Right.
right? And so what she's saying is, how can I control my thoughts?
Right. So, the first thing, and this is, it seems so remedial, but it works. And I think you alluded to it first, is that the moment I'm starting to feel any of that, I stop and breathe, right? I stop and
Yeah.
like really take in, where am I? Um, and what we're doing is bringing our brain to consciousness, right? To awareness, to executive functioning, to thinking, if that makes sense. And what I ask clients to do immediately, and again, this is an act that you're going to practice every day, and sometimes 20 times in a day, until you start figuring out how to do it very quickly. So people have to slow down and actually give themselves time and grace to get this done. So the first thing I ask them to do is, it's like you use your fingers. You have 5 fingers. And the first thing I want you to do is, be aware of the things that you can see. What is around you, immediately around you,
Hmm.
right? And then the things that you can touch. So lots of times you're in a situation where, and again, this is about anxiety. So anxiety and fear live in the same place. And you can't recognize what is the anxiety that I'm supposed to have, like you said, getting out of a dangerous situation, and what is it just emotional, right? And so until you get a grasp on those things, this is the steps I would take anyway.
But they go together. So what
Yes,
I notice is we are responding because of our neural networks, and we've talked about this in
sure.
past
Yes.
podcasts. So we're on autopilot. Our subconscious mind is taken over. We don't even recognize it, but something has triggered us in the outer world.
Hmm.
And the next thing you know, we've got a knot in our stomach, our heart rate goes up, and we think, I got to get out of here.
Hmm.
Or that person is looking at me like that. I know it. Right. And we're doing all of this crazy. I know that what my boyfriend said was, he wants to break up with me. And right, we get crazy. And
Right.
then we feed those fears and we make those things happen.
Right. So
So you're
yeah,
talking about cultivating mindfulness.
basically. So in my
Okay.
world, we call it grounding. So
Okay.
you learn how to ground yourself, right? And grounding, the last thing you do in grounding, like I said, it's 5 steps. The last thing you do in grounding is feel, right? But when we're
Feel?
feel,
You don't feel? That's the last thing you do?
that's the last thing.
Okay.
No, last thing you do is feel.
Okay.
because
Mhm.
your emotions are taking over, right? And it's all
Yes.
these feelings flooding all over the place. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to tell him exactly how I feel because he dumped me or he rejected me, and you're just on fire. Or I'm going to go in my cave because no one loves me. You see what I mean? So you're on fire. All of your emotions are firing at once. And a
Or
lot of
for
times,
her,
mhm,
I am so scared to
right,
make a move
right,
that I'm frozen and I'm just going to be frozen and I'm just going to deal with this, even though I don't like it, because it's a lot better than looking out there at the big bad wolf that could devour me.
right. So it's paralyzing. It's paralytic, right? So
Yep.
in grounding, we have basically take all of our five senses and we turn it on its head. So first we look at what we can see, right? Because as soon as we start seeing, we start processing, we start observing, right? Getting our brain back to working. Then what we can touch, then what we can hear, then what we can smell. The last thing is the emotion you can feel, right? And by then, even though like at first it's going to take forever to get there, it seems like it's usually about 10 minutes, but it feels like forever. You'll start doing this in seconds, right? You'll get to a place where I can go ahead and feel my emotion and it doesn't have a lot of charge to it. So even if I'm feeling rejected, I don't have the automated response that tells me what I'm supposed to do about that. But when I let the emotion go first, the emotion tells me what I'm supposed to do about that, but I haven't figured out that's the emotion I'm actually feeling. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I look at it in a different way that might be a little bit more woo-woo to people, but the first thing that I recognize is this isn't real. Right? Like, in
Right,
other words, the only reason it's real is because you're looking at it like that. And when
right,
we've talked a lot about reality in our podcasts, and reality is what your perception is, and your perception makes your reality. And so when you can pull back your perception and say, wait a second, I know that I'm only looking at this from my camera, from my viewpoint, and I can change that. I like to talk about it like being mindful.
yes,
And when we're mindful, it means we have to first stop.
right,
And we have to, it requires taking just a small period of focused attention away from your crazy. And your
right,
crazy is, oh my God, I'm so scared. I want to. And people do things like, lash out at the person that they love. They ruin
right,
relationships, right? They kill them emotionally because of their fear.
right,
They have road rage because somebody cut them off and they think that person doesn't care about me. It's like that person doesn't do anything. They just cut you off,
yeah,
right? They right? We see it in road rage, right? When people are flipping everybody off and it's like, wow, look at their mindset. When we perceive our coworkers to, and sometimes they are, right? But when we perceive people to do something, we're actually projecting that energy to them. And a lot of times they fill that portion of the play. They're like actors in your play. They'll do
right,
what you want. And so we can perceive other people not liking us, looking at us in a negative light, judging us. And I think that if you can maintain the mindfulness that you're talking about, the focus,
mhm,
I think that you begin to develop a very grounded and rooted silent meditation, even if it's for 30 seconds.
right. Yeah, it gives you clarity, basically. So
Right.
so you
But
right,
here's the other thing that I think that we ignore. You talk a lot about, and I agree with you. I've done that before where you go, okay, here's a rock and here's a tree and look at the grass growing. And so it brings you back to being rooted, right?
mhm, mhm,
But what about your relationship with silence?
mm,
That's the scary thing, I think, for a lot of people because we believe that the outer world is actually doing these things when actually we're doing these things to the
sure.
outer world, reflecting our mirror image to it. And
And,
so we
go
have
I'm
to pull
sorry.
back. No, we just have to pull back and just get quiet for a moment.
Right. And I think, like you said, this relationship with silence, but I also think that people, I think innately and subconsciously know they have the answer, right? They know they have the answer. And if they are quiet enough, they're going to get it. And generally, it's opposite of what they're doing. right? So it's kind of like,
Right.
I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that, because if I know that, then I have to do it. And I don't want to do that. I just want people to respond to me the way I want them to respond to me. I don't want to change anything I'm doing. And the reality is, like you just said, it really is in them. It's their journey, it's their change, it's their growth. It's the things that they have to do that they just don't really want to do. And I think that's everyone. We all want the world to respond to us just because we are who we are. We don't want to have to do anything for that. That's human nature.
What I get with people is purpose. You have to be purposely quiet. You have to pull in. And that is what is so unsettling. When people realize that it's about them and it's not about the outer world, there's a ping pong effect. You realize, okay, wait a second, this isn't the outer world, this is really me. And then you're like, no, it's the outer world. And then you realize, no, it's really about me. And pretty soon you start to realize that when you begin to change what you're thinking and you get quiet, what you thought was happening isn't happening. And that's where you can replace it with something more meaningful that you would like to see manifest in your life, including just an attitude.
Right. And yeah, I mean, and again, I love people, right? I do people for a living, but I also recognize that it is so much easier if the world around me would change. It
Hmm.
feels that way. That it's so much easier if you, Jocelyn, would just stop treating me like this, right? Instead of saying, I have to stop, like, allowing you to treat me like this, right?
Yeah,
That
because we do it over and over and over and over.
that
It's that hamster wheel.
Right.
Yeah.
Then that's the work that I have to do, but I don't wanna have to do that, because I think everybody in the world thinks that they are special, and they're so special that the world should respond to them the way they want it to. And that's true, and it will happen as long as the relationship with yourself is right. And
Yeah, that's how you
unfortunately,
change
we
your
don't.
reality. Right.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. So that applies. That's a what I call the law of behavior, like the law of physics. That is what happens when you start to look at self and take care of self and manage self and love self, right? This
Hmm.
is not selfish. It's just
Hmm.
self-love that says, "No, I can't be in a relationship with someone who treats me that way." And then when I
Right. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
when I don't allow that to happen, guess what? Magically, I'm not in a relationship with someone who treats me that way. And I magically find someone who does, right?
Right. Or you can say, I'm going to perceive this relationship differently instead of thinking that I am their victim and they are my captor. You
Absolutely.
can change your victim mentality and really change the relationship.
Absolutely.
But it is about confronting yourself, it's about confronting your experience and developing a focused attention to confront self.
Mhm.
So that
Exactly.
means turning off the outer world and getting as quiet as you can, right? Just for a moment and
Right.
sit with that and look at yourself and take a deep breath, like you said, and stop and say, okay, I see what's happening with me as you breathe. And then you can pull up in your mind's eye a different feeling because we actually have complete control over our feelings
Right.
if we'll focus on it. And then you open your eyes and you can take in the environment and you'll see that the experience in the present moment has changed because you have changed.
Right. And the problem with all of this, right, is that, especially when we're talking about fear, because fear and anxiety live together. In fact, it's almost impossible to have one without the other. Um, is well, I shouldn't say that. It's impossible to have fear without anxiety. It's possible to have anxiety without fear.
That's true.
Um, and so the problem with that is because they live in the same house, and there's a physiological response to it. So there's other thoughts that we have, like sadness. Sadness doesn't necessarily have a physiological response. Sometimes you're sad and you don't cry, right? But when you're anxious, you're always going to have some sensations in your body somewhere. Your heart's going to beat faster, you're going to get clammy. So your body responds to that stimuli. And so oftentimes it's hard for people to really figure out how to get centered when anxiety's on board because their body's saying something different than what their mind is saying, right? And that's why grounding or mindfulness, as you call it, become extraordinarily important so that you can gain the clarity, so that you can then see where is this coming from and what do I need to do about it. So again, that grounding or that mindful activity is so important to get right, right? And to get down as the foundational piece of trying to figure out and manage fears.
Yeah, and I'd like to also say it's getting you're going to be uncomfortable because it's something new,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And because you're not familiar with it. And so what we realize is that we fear the unknown. And that's a lot of why people are paralyzed, because they fear the unknown. But if you practice what you and I are talking about with grounding and mindfulness, you are actually the one that plants the seeds to ultimately create your reality by stopping, delaying your fear, delaying your reaction by
Hmm.
recognizing what's really in front of you. What you control and you can't control is yourself. You control your world. And it's a discipline. And disciplines can make people very uncomfortable because it awakens them and it gives them the power to see that they actually have been out of control emotionally instead of in control with their thoughts, feelings, and words. And so it's sort of like handing somebody a magic wand.
Hmm.
Right? And
Right.
energy does jump. I agree with you. When you are in relationships, whether it's work relationships, romantic relationships, or just relationships, with family and friends, the energy does jump. And that can be very hard to change your mind about things when you're hearing the constant drone of something that triggered you, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that people have to, and it's hard, especially in a work environment, you have to take more mental breaks
Right.
and really meditate before work and after work, and even on your lunch hour and on your breaks. You have to continually tell yourself, this is the way that I'm perceiving this. I can perceive this person and the situation completely differently.
Right.
So it takes work.
Absolutely. And so like, like that, I think that's what I was referring to, is that this is becomes the foundational piece, right? So if you want to conquer your fears, if you want to conquer after you've figured out what you're afraid of, if you want to conquer that, then you have to add this piece as the elemental piece that leads to all the other stuff. So again, a lot of times it's like diet and exercise. We want to have the Beyonce body, but I don't want to do what Beyonce does to get it. Like that
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of work. I just wanted to take the little diet pill and look at exercise videos on TV, but I don't want to actually eat right and go to the gym. So this is no different. It's mental exercise for the brain, so that we can get to a place of conquering fear. So if folks can just take that, the five senses, and that's what you're basically. This is what grounding is about. It's the five senses, and the last sense is the one that talks about the emotions, which is the first one that comes up when you know you need to go through this exercise. So as soon as that feeling
Right.
comes up, you start doing all the other four senses, and that last one is when you say, okay, what is this really about? How do I really handle it? How do I want to handle it? How, and you may not do anything about it at first. It's just grounding. It's just giving
Hmm.
you the information you need to have so that you can do something about it in the future.
Yeah, it's sort of a wow, look at me.
Right.
Look at what I'm doing. Look at what I'm feeling,
Right.
right? And it begins a journey into self that is actually a very liberating experience. And the
Exactly.
more you practice it, the more control you have. And, you know, to your point about Beyonce, she also, I'm sure, has trained herself to do specific things so that she can have what she wants. She
Absolutely.
doesn't lay in bed all day,
Not at
right? She
all.
goes to the gym, I'm sure she has trainers and all those other things, but you can have the things that you want if you will. It's really about discipline. If you will discipline yourself to get there.
Right.
And so we can't be sloppy with our emotions if we're trying to achieve a peace of mind.
Right.
You see, it's always going to come back to us, right? And there are situations that we walk into that can be, discombobulating, right? Especially, when we're out and, something like, let's just say, like a protest breaks out or something like that, you can remove yourself from that.
Absolutely. But if you're in tune with self and you have all these tools, you'll actually know when to do that. Like,
Yeah, and you don't
you'll
attract those
right.
things either.
You'll say, "Whoa, this is not for me. I'm going to go ahead and part ways," and you have no
Hmm.
problem leaving. When you're not there yet, you kind of sit back and try to analyze, is it me? Is it them? What is really going on? And you're delayed.
Hmm.
So, as much as this you're gonna because when I teach people to do this, they're like, "Oh, that just takes too much time." And
Hmm.
my comment to them is, well, you spend the time either way. One,
That's right.
you spend it productive, and one, you spend it actually you probably spend even more time because you have to do with all the chaotic, the sonic boom stuff, everything destroyed, and then trying to fix it and clean it up, and you have to do a lot of work for all that. And so I'm just saying, let's just do it on the front end. Whereas, like you said, it's a discipline. So
Yeah, but you have to want it. You
yeah,
have to be so uncomfortable with your life that you actually do the work. You have to want what you want.
right.
And you're never going to get it on the outside. It's always going to begin on the inside.
Right.
It's
And
just
so
how it is.
I was watching a video or interview, and someone said, you have to be willing to do what other people want if you want to be successful. And it's kind of that thing. I have girlfriends that, they'll stay on Twitter or Instagram all day long, and they can watch every show on known demand. And, when they talk to me about it, they know I don't watch TV. They're like, oh, that's right. You don't watch TV. But then they'll say, well, why are you so productive? How do you have like 3 jobs? Right. And I'm like, well, because I don't watch TV,
Mhm.
because I've given up that thing. Now, I'm not saying anything about
Mhm.
anybody who does. It's just that I just choose to spend my time a different way. And so if that makes me more productive because I have more time to do those things, then that's how my friends are seeing me. I'm just seeing myself as using it the way I want to use it. So again, we have to figure out what is it that we want, then work for that, whatever that work looks like.
Mhm. Remove your attention from what you don't want and put it on what you do want, because your attention, I posted something about that. Neville Goddard says that what you give your attention, you're paying for what you give your attention to.
Oh yeah,
You're buying that. You're
yeah.
setting yourself up for that. And
Yes.
I'll say this in closing is there is always a way to get what you want. You're never stuck. Never. There's
So true.
always a way.
So
Yeah.
true. So true.
This has been a really great podcast for me. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Mari. And do
Absolutely.
you have anything else that you'd like to say?
Just do your five senses grounding work and you'll be on your road on the way.
All right. So tune in for our next podcast. We're going to talk a little bit more about fear, grounding, and how we can achieve the things that we want in our lives. So thank you all for listening and have a great day. All participants of the JocelynLive podcast have been thoroughly vetted and agree to discuss personal information on this podcast. Each participant is offered a referral to therapy if needed. No information given should be considered medical or mental treatment or advice. Thank you all for joining us. If you're interested in joining our podcast or you would like to participate in a podcast, please email info@jocelynlive.com.